Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, what are we pretending it is today? Friday. It's definitely Friday. We don't have to pretend that hard. All days feel like Friday. This is Friday, June 28th. I believe I have the date right. Here, let me see. It's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Okay, yeah. So I think we're right. As you can tell, we're pre-recording this one. And what I hope to be able to do with this is put together enough stories worth catching up on, plus a few strange, weird, outtake type stories, I guess, wild take stories that we can throw in here at the beginning, end of the show, a little bit of filler, fill things out, give you something to take into the weekend with you. Here's one that's like really, I think, cut out for this kind of filler nonsense. Let me grab this one here. Is this, should I go to the original report here from the BBC? Steer away from the Hill for once. Here's an interesting one. I happen to like this one a lot. June 24th story from BBC News. Beer ban leaves German neo-Nazi rock fans thirsty. It sure does. The Hill had a slightly different take on it in its headline, which was German residents buy all the beer in town to keep it away from far-right event. I think that's the part I really wanted to get to. Let me see how the BBC covers it here. Beer and marching songs may have fueled Adolf Hitler's rise to power. Bet you didn't think I'd invoke Hitler before 9:05 a.m. on a Friday. But anyway, neo-Nazis faced an alcohol ban at a German rock festival over the weekend. The ban was a new tool in the fight against neo-Nazi influence. Some 2,000 locals in the eastern town of Ostritz also rallied against the far right, so we had that going for us, which is nice. Police seized 4,200 liters, or 924 UK gallons, not even US gallons, of beer in Ostritz on Friday, then 200 liters more on Saturday. Now, that, I guess, as I saw explained in the Hills version of the article, was, I guess, their legal tool against it. They seized all the beer and didn't allow it to be bought, or rather, I guess, to be used for the rock festival. And I guess that may have come out of the pockets of the rock festival people. But they thought that the attendees might just simply go to local stores and buy beer themselves when they found out that the festival didn't have any. So the locals went and bought out all the beer in the town's stores to make sure that the neo-Nazis didn't get a hold of it. Unless, of course, they were prepared and brought their own because of the neo-Nazi motto, B and Z prepared, I guess, is how they might say it, and probably with their own words for be and prepared as well. They're very thorough, the Germans. The neo-Nazis, maybe not so much. So there you have it. Locals bought more than 200 crates of beer in the town's supermarkets. Those might be cases here in the United States. They suspected that fans going to the Shield and Sword Festival, and by the way, what are the initials for Shield and Sword? SS. Yes, they were on their way to the SS Festival, and they suspected that they would descend on supermarkets, knowing about the alcohol ban, which had been imposed by a Dresden court. An Ostritz society activist, Georg Saldit, told Germany's popular Bild Daily, the plan was devised a week in advance. We wanted to dry the Nazis out. We thought, if an alcohol ban is coming, we'll empty the shelves at the Penny. That would be the supermarket. How nice of them. Plus, they had all this beer, which was great. Which, hopefully, the neo-Nazis didn't find out, where the beer was and then go raid people's houses. I'm sure they would have enjoyed kicking in doors and windows for beer. Ostritz, near the Polish border, already has a reputation for far-right activism, something locals were determined to correct at the weekend. Germany's, Süddeutsche Zeitung. Oh, Southern Germany. I don't know what Zeitung actually is, but news, maybe. Says 500 to 600 fans attended the festival, compared with some 1,200 last year. So that's good. It's dwindling. About 1,400 police were deployed at the festival, including hundreds from other parts of Germany. Saxony Regional Police said the operation went smoothly and there were just a few minor incidents. The police tweeted photos of their alcohol seizures. A local woman explained to ZDF television why the neo-Nazis were unwelcome. Because they're neo-Nazis, but okay. For us, it's important to send the message from Ostritz that there are people here who won't tolerate this, who say, we have different values here. We're setting an example, which is not the image of a far-right concert, which dominates the media coverage. I bet that was translated. The Dresden court justified its ban on alcohol at the festival by saying the event has an obviously martial and aggressive character, and there was a risk that alcohol could make violence more likely. Chemnitz, I don't know how they say it, Chemnitz, an eastern city, saw a big far-right demonstration last August. So I guess they have this stuff on their minds. I like the headline in the Hill. Love the spirit behind the story. And, I'm sure you had to twist a lot of German arms to get them to buy up all the beer in town. Must have been a fun sight. Okay. Well, there were some other weird stories out there that I thought were kind of interesting that maybe we could use to throw in to the intro of today's show. We'll toss one more in the mix just because this one seemed so weird, and we'll save some of the others perhaps for later on if we need to build this show out. This one from Bloomberg News, and look at this. I've reached my free article limit. I didn't even know that there was one in Bloomberg. I'll have to go back to Pocket and read it Pocket style. Trump's protocol chief is quitting just before the G20 summit. Jennifer Jacobs reports for Bloomberg. Sean Lawler, I guess is his name, facing a probe into claims of verbal altercations. Protocol official assists the president on overseas trips. I have to admit, I saw this one accompanied by a tweet that made it sound rather intriguing. And let's see if we can get to the proper part of the story here. The Trump administration official in charge of diplomatic protocol, and I didn't even realize they had one. Most administrations do. I just thought they did without because, well, look at them. Anyway, the Trump administration official in charge of diplomatic protocol plans to resign and isn't going to Japan for this week's Group of 20 meetings, where he would have played a sensitive behind-the-scenes role, according to people familiar with the matter. Sean Lawler, a State Department official whose title is Chief of Protocol, is departing amid a possible Inspector General's probe into accusations of intimidating staff and carrying a whip in the office, according to one of the people. Yes, amazing. And the tweet I saw was saying, well, if you had protocol chief resigns because he's accused of carrying a horsewhip around the office in your Trump administration bingo, well, pretty amazing, I guess, for you. The protocol chief assists the president on overseas trips and when foreign leaders visit the White House by making introductions and briefing the president on protocol. Lawler, a fixture in the Oval Office during dignitaries' visits, served as the president's liaison to the diplomatic corps at the State Department. Diplomatic fine points handled by the protocol chief include helping determine where to hold meetings and in what order participants should enter a room. Lawler declined to comment, and the White House communications staff and the State Department didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. Lawler, who is in a position confirmed by the Senate and has the rank of ambassador, was scheduled to accompany the president to the G20 on Friday and Saturday. President Donald Trump will meet with China's Xi Jinping, Russia's Vladimir Putin, can you believe it, and Turkey's, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Man, I'll never get it right. Topping Trump's agenda is restarting trade talks with China. Well, I'm sure he'll do a great job about that. The assistant chief of protocol, Mary Kate Fisher, has been asked to fill Lawler's role for the G20 trip, one of the people said. And another acting for Taz. Can't wait. Everyone's going to love it. Lawler has worked for the government for almost 3 decades, according to his State Department biography. He's a U.S. Navy veteran who has served in diplomatic roles at the White House, National Security Council, and U.S. Cyber Command in Maryland. Trump has little fondness for Lawler. Oh, that's worthy of a trombone, I would think. And repeatedly asked why he still worked at the White House, according to the people. Well, that's pretty amazing, I must say. And there's a note here that says, I guess the update with the whip goes in the second paragraph. Yeah, that seems unusual, and I don't really have any idea what the problem that Trump had with him is, but I don't know whether that's going to end up making him a sympathetic figure or just a more ridiculous figure. I don't know. Who knows? It couldn't possibly make any difference. He wasn't listening to the protocol officers to begin with. So, I don't know. I'm not, we don't have any reason to believe that it's like good riddance for this guy. Just another story in the panoply of ridiculousness. Boy, I hope I use all my big words right today. All right, let's talk a little bit more about Trump and emoluments and the various corrupt ways in which he removes money from our taxpayer coffers and puts it in his pocket. You know, stuff we've been over before, but there are some new entries in this subject. One here from the Washington Post from David Farenthold, who's always worth reading. Josh Dawsey, who I guess is also frequently worth reading. And hey, no slouches are Jonathan O'Connell and Michelle Yee-Hee Lee, which I'm pretty sure I've never had to call that name before. I would definitely have noticed Michelle Yee-Hee Lee. They've put together this great article. When Trump visits his clubs, government agencies and Republicans pay to be where he is. And he must love nothing quite as much as that. When President Trump, it says, finished his first official rally of his re-election campaign this week, this would have been June 20th, so last week, he got on Air Force One, but he didn't go home to Washington. Instead, he flew 190 miles in the opposite direction to visit his own Doral Golf Resort outside Miami. The resort's profits have fallen since Trump took office, but it had a major event planned for the next day, a fundraiser for Trump's re-election campaign. It would be his 126th visit to one of his properties since taking office, and this visit, like more than a dozen before it, would bring paying customers, allowing Trump to play a double role. The president would be the headliner and the caterer. Trump has bigger designs for the Doral Club. He has suggested holding next year's Group of Seven meeting, the G7, at Doral, or another of his luxury resorts, current and former White House staffers said. Since taking office, Trump has faced pushback about his official visits to his properties from some of his aides. I guess it's been really effective, including inside the White House counsel's office. They worried about the appearance that he was using the power of the presidency to direct taxpayer money into his own pockets, according to current and former White House officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity, because they were telling the truth, to discuss private conversations. Trump has rebuffed such warnings, overruling a recommendation that he not visit his Turnberry Golf Club in Scotland last summer, according to aides, and in recent months, he has scheduled even more detours from official trips to visit his businesses, golf courses in Ireland, Los Angeles, and Doral. In all, his scores of trips have brought his private businesses at least $1.6 million in revenue from federal officials and GOP campaigns who pay to go where Trump goes, according to a Washington Post analysis. They gave Trump valuable marketing opportunities to showcase his opulent properties on an international stage. Trump's preference for his own properties also has reshaped the GOP fundraising schedule with benefits for the Trump Organization. About 1/3 of all the political fundraisers or donor meetings that Trump has attended, 23 out of 63, have taken place at his own properties, according to the Post analysis of federal campaign finance records and the president's public schedule. Campaign finance records show several Republican groups paying to hold events where Trump spoke. GOP fundraisers say they do that in part to increase the chances Trump will attend. It also has reshaped the spending habits of the federal government, turning the president into a vendor. The president knows that by visiting his properties, taxpayer dollars will flow directly into his own pockets. Then, unsurprisingly, the president visits his properties all the time, said Ryan Shapiro, the executive director of a watchdog group called Property of the People. That group obtained extensive records on federal spending at Trump properties via public records requests and lawsuits that it shared with the Post. The White House did not respond to requests for comment. Trump still owns his businesses, although he says he has given day-to-day control to his sons, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric. But that doesn't necessarily, of course, mean anything with respect to the profits. Federal spending at Trump's properties has drawn scrutiny from the attorneys general in Maryland and the District of Columbia. They have sued Trump for allegedly violating the Constitution's prohibition against presidents receiving extra gifts or payments, known as emoluments, from the federal government outside the presidential salary. They have also accused Trump of violating a constitutional ban on emoluments from foreign governments by doing business with them at his D.C. hotel. The case is pending. 2.5 years in, the case is pending. And this week, the House passed an amendment banning the State Department from spending money at Trump-branded properties. It's against the emoluments clause of the Constitution to be making money out of the job, said the amendment's sponsor, Representative Steve Cohen, and he does it every chance he can. The Trump Organization did not respond to requests for comment. George Sorial, a former ethics advisor to the company, said Trump's properties do not seek to make a profit from government customers, but charge them the cost of their stays. And in interviews, political customers say their attendees love patronizing the Trump brand. To estimate the revenue produced by Trump's visits to his properties, the Post reviewed public records about federal spending and campaign spending at Trump's properties, then compared those records to Trump's publicly available travel schedule. The Post sought to identify any spending that seemed triggered by Trump's visit. Payments by federal officials who accompanied him, payments by campaign committees for events at which Trump spoke. The actual amount of money Trump has received as a result of his visits and campaign events is probably much higher than the $1.6 million the Post identified. That's because most of the records available about government spending date to the first half of 2017. Covering just the first few months of Trump's presidency so far. And the records of campaign spending don't account for other revenue that Trump may have made off of campaign events, including overnight stays by donors attending the event. These records show that Trump began receiving payments from his own government in February of 2017, when he made his first presidential visit to his Mar-a-Lago club in Palm Beach, Florida. The Defense Department paid $12,000 for rooms at the club, according to invoices, emails, and other records obtained by Property of the People. In April of 2017, Trump returned again to Mar-a-Lago, where he hosted Chinese President Xi Jinping. Those 4 days, the government paid Trump's club at least $30,000 on meeting rooms and hotel lodgings for then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and other VIPs in suites and beachfront cabanas, the documents show. Tillerson got the Atom Suite, touted for its double-sized jacuzzi tub. Wowee. Then Deputy Chief of Staff Joe Hagan was assigned to the Banyan Bungalow, which includes a private meditation garden, according to a State Department manifest. Do you know what they charged for each room? One State Department official asked Michael Dobbs, a State Department travel coordinator, in an email obtained by Property of the People. The Post could not reach Dobbs for comment. $546, I believe, which is 300% of the lodging per diem, Dobbs wrote back, meaning it was 3 times the standard allowance for federal travelers in that part of Florida. There are some exceptions, but 300% is the maximum amount the government will reimburse any traveler for lodging. Also, as first reported by ProPublica, the government was sent a $1,000 bill rung up by Trump aides at one of the club's bars. Remember this story? They asked the bartender to leave so they could speak confidentially, and the Secret Service did not allow the bartender to enter the room again, the club's catering director wrote. The group served themselves. In all, the Post found $145,000 in government payments to 3 Trump businesses. Mar-a-Lago, and remember this is only in the first couple months of his administration, $145,000 in the first couple of months. Mar-a-Lago, among them, the golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey, and the golf resort in Turnberry. These all appeared connected to Trump's visits. The State Department and the White House did not answer questions about how much more federal money had been paid to Trump's clubs. Within the White House, ethics officials sometimes sought to dissuade Trump from making side trips to his courses or holding public presidential events there. But in some cases, Trump did it anyway. Former White House aides said he stopped to visit his Waikiki hotel during a Hawaii layover in 2017 on his way to Asia. He stopped in Turnberry. Earlier this month, Trump also inserted a 3-day detour to his golf club in Ireland between official trips to the United Kingdom and France, taking Trump and his aides hundreds of miles out of the way. We're going to be staying at Doonbeg in Ireland because it's convenient and it's a great place, but it's convenient, which of course it isn't, Trump said then. While in Ireland, he also met with the Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar. His ethics officials have also sought to dissuade his subordinates. Stefan Passantino, the former White House lawyer, tried to bar any cabinet or White House official from appearing at a Trump property in their official capacity, according to former White House officials. Sorial, the Trump Organization's former compliance counsel, who served as the company's in-house ethics advisor until this year, in an interview rejected the idea that Trump was turning a profit off business with his own government. Sure, why not? It generates nothing. We charge domestic government entities our costs, Sorial said. Last year, for instance, Trump spent 2 days at his Turnberry golf course in the middle of an official trip to Europe. Sorial said the hotel charged the government only $175 per room, a huge discount from the normal rate of $500 or more. I assure you, he said, it's not business we want. Sorial did not provide any statistics on the total revenue from government entities. Federal Election Commission records paint a more detailed picture of political spending at Trump properties, showing about $1.2 million paid by GOP-linked committees for events like the one on Wednesday, where Trump was the guest of honor, and also the guy who owned the room. Republican officials say Trump has not told them to hold the events at his properties, but after a while, he didn't have to. They saw how much time he spent at his own properties and decided to go where the president liked to be. In addition, GOP fundraisers said Trump hotels are used to the logistics of presidential events, are luxurious, and can even be cheaper than competitors. The Trump Organization's properties are, quote, world-class venues and destination locations that our supporters want to visit and are excited to attend events at, said Brian O. Walsh, president of a pro-Trump committee, America First Action PAC, that has spent $427,000 on events at Trump properties. The staff is always respectful, professional, and provides best-in-class service. So far, GOP fundraisers say donors aren't concerned that some of their money winds up spent at the president's private business. They're thrilled. The Trump Hotel in Washington is the best hotel in D.C., said Roy Bailey, GOP donor and fundraiser for Trump's 2020 re-election. It's got all the ample space, and it's got the president's name on it. It's fantastic. It's a huge draw for people who want to go to support the president. Doug Deason, another prominent Trump donor, explained one reason. Visiting Trump's hotel often means hobnobbing with officials in Trump's government who treat the lobby as a friendly hangout. The original lobbying, eh? He said he recently saw White House counselor Kellyanne Conway there and Attorney General William P. Barr, who was having dinner and taking pictures with customers because of his lack of concern about the appearance of impropriety. Donors, when they come to town now, they want to go to the hotel. They think it's the place to be, said Sean Spicer, an advisor to America First Action and former White House press secretary. Remember that guy? This week's fundraiser took place at Doral, a resort that Trump bought in 2012 that is now severely underperforming its competitors, according to testimony that Trump's representative gave in a county tax dispute last year. It's severely underperforming because they need to lower the tax assessment on it, you see. Trump stayed overnight at the resort Tuesday, then attended Wednesday's fundraiser, which attracted about 100 donors and raised $6 million, according to a person familiar with the event, who spoke, of course, on the condition of anonymity because the person was not authorized to speak publicly. The event was closed to the public. I've also got this other piece here, which is from Huffington Post, which I think takes a similar angle, but let's pick this one up. It's an SV Date piece. Trump adds another $1 million to his golf tab with his visit to his resort near Miami. The overnight trip to Trump National Doral brings the total cost to taxpayers to just under $107 million. So sort of the other side of the ledger on this one. President Donald Trump's visit to yet another one of his golf resorts on Wednesday likely cost taxpayers at least another $1.1 million, bringing his total golf tab to $106.9 million. Trump arrived at Trump National Doral near the Miami airport late Tuesday, following a rally in Orlando, and left Wednesday afternoon after a high-dollar fundraiser that was expected to bring in several $1 million to the Republican National Committee and his re-election campaign. The White House would not say whether he played golf Wednesday morning. Gee whiz. But an informal advisor to Trump told HuffPost that Trump was likely to play around before the noon fundraiser. The White House almost never acknowledges that Trump has played golf following one of his golf course visits. The only exceptions have been when Trump has played with someone famous, or with South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who I guess doesn't count as famous for these purposes. Wednesday brought Trump's total number of days on a golf course to 186 in his first 881 days in office, all but 2 of which have been at one of his own properties. Trump has played twice during trips to Japan at the invitation of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Doral is the 8th of his courses that he has visited on the taxpayer dime. Didn't we decide that we were going to start doing it as Abe Shinzo? Maybe we didn't all get that memo yet, or maybe I misremember it. The Miami leg of the trip added at least $1.1 million in additional travel costs for taxpayers, according to a HuffPost analysis. That includes additional flight costs of Air Force One and the expenses involved flying in a set of his motorcade vehicles and setting up necessary security and communications in a second city. Because this was a political trip, as opposed to Trump's $3.6 million Ireland golf vacation, which was technically an official visit after he arranged a brief airport meeting with that country's prime minister, the Trump campaign and RNC will be responsible for reimbursing the U.S. Treasury for a small portion of that $1.1 million. What that portion is exactly is unclear. How the White House determines that figure was among the questions Oregon Democratic Senator Ron Wyden asked last October after Trump began routinely campaigning for Republican congressional candidates at, quote, official events that are supposed to be non-political. Wyden set a November 7th, 2018 deadline to receive the information, but as of Wednesday, which you might note is after November 7th, 2018, as of Wednesday, still has not gotten a response. Isn't that strange? Federal Election Commission guidelines require that the Treasury be reimbursed for the use of the presidential plane, but at a rate far lower than the actual cost of flying the modified 747 that serves as the primary Air Force One. The FEC rules say the campaign must repay what it would have cost to charter a plane, but that the comparison plane need not be one large enough to accommodate the dozens of Secret Service agents and military aides who are required to be with the president at all times. In other words, while Air Force One costs taxpayers $273,000 an hour to fly, according to a recent Government Accountability Office report, the campaign only has to pay back what a plane large enough to carry Trump and his traveling campaign staff would have required. On the trip to his rally in Orlando and his golf resort in Doral, for example, the use of Air Force One for the 5 hours of total flight time cost taxpayers $1.4 million. But the rules allow the Trump campaign to reimburse the Treasury as little as a few tens of thousands of dollars. Trump's Doral golf course has already been paid a deposit of $84,822 by the RNC to host the lunch event, and will likely receive at least that much afterward. A portion of those payments flow to Trump personally after he reneged on his promise to separate himself from his businesses in the event he got elected. Well, that'll wrap that one up. But the two sides of the same coin covered nicely as between the post, Washington and post, Huff, as we now call it. All right, well, just so you're up to date on those things, I believe there's even more out there on the emoluments front. And, yes, this was it. Another emoluments-related story, I guess. This one actually, for whatever reason, focusing on Ivanka Trump, who I guess is under similar, if not exactly the same, prohibition. But NBC News reported the other day, and this one caught my eye because I thought it was a little weirdly structured. Ivanka Trump made almost $4 million from Trump Washington Hotel last year. The subheader saying the president's daughter is working as an unpaid advisor to the White House, but continuing to make millions from the family business. When I saw the story tweeted around initially, it was in the shorthand of Ivanka Trump had made almost $4 million from her investment in the Trump Washington Hotel, which of course was a ridiculous formulation, as she has not herself invested anything. She doesn't have money of her own for the most part, and the investment, such as it is in her name, in the Trump Hotel was just shares gifted to her by her father. There wasn't any investment to speak of. But hey, why nitpick, right? Sure. All right. Here, though, the NBC News piece reporting the story from Dara Gregorian and Freddie Tunnard. Hope I've got your names correct. Ivanka Trump, I think it's Ivanka. Ivanka Trump pulled in almost $4 million in revenue last year from her stake in the family hotel near the White House, documents released by the White House on Friday's show. Trump took in $3,952,480 in revenue from the Trump Old Post Office LLC, good old LLCs, in 2018, up slightly from the amount she reported in 2017, her financial disclosure forms show. The Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C., which is located in the old post office building and opened during the 2016 campaign, amazingly enough, has been good for her father's wallet as well. His disclosure form, which was made public last month, showed the Republican lobbyist and diplomat hotspot generated revenue of more than $40.8 million, up from $40.4 million in 2017. I don't know if that's really considered a significant rise, but there it is. The hotel has been a focus of lawsuits against the president, charging that Trump is violating the Constitution's emoluments clause by profiting from his office as diplomats and foreign dignitaries spend big money there. Ivanka Trump's interest in the hotel is valued at between $5 and $25 million. The financial news wasn't all good for the first daughter. Her fashion line, which she announced she was closing down last year, took in at least $1 million in revenue, down from at least $5 million in her previous annual disclosure, the Associated Press reported. The bulk of her assets, valued at more than $50 million, are in a trust that holds her business and corporations, her previous disclosures have shown. Her husband and fellow unpaid White House advisor Jared Kushner continued to take in millions of dollars from his holdings in real estate, the disclosure forms also show. Kushner's holdings of apartment buildings through his family real estate firm, Kushner Companies, was the source of much of his income. Westminster Management, the family business overseeing its rental buildings, generated $1.5 million. The form reported Kushner's stake in his real estate company, Kagro, was worth at least $25 million, the same amount he reported last year. He also appears to have cut his debt. He had loans and lines of credit worth at least $27 million at the end of 2018, down from a minimum value of $40 million the previous year, the AP reported. The ethics form disclosures include very broad ranges, making it impossible to determine the exact value of their assets or income. An analysis of their disclosure forms by Bloomberg put their joint 2018 income at anywhere between $28.8 million and $135.1 million. The forms still have to be reviewed by the White House counsel's office and the Office of Government Ethics. And I guess you might as well point out at this point that Jared Kushner almost always gets everything on his official forms wrong. So who knows whether that's anywhere near the numbers as they actually stand. Just a little caveat you have to throw in there because they're so honest and transparent. Okay, well, that now out of the way, I have got another story to add to the theme of LOL YOLO and M. There are no rules for Trumps, but this time back to the Donald himself. Here's a subject that we have hinted at a couple of times and never actually read anybody else's writing on, but I have here, let's see, I've got a Politico piece. Let me open it up here from Natasha Bertrand and Darren Samuelson. And I know I've got in here, in pocket, not too far down from this, although I'll have to see if I can find it quickly. I think Amanda Marcotte wrote a piece on this too, which was a little out of her ordinary wheelhouse, I guess. But, well, I think it's well worth everyone's time to think a little bit, at least, about what might happen here. Yeah, here's Amanda's piece. You want to start with hers, and then we'll follow up with Natasha Bertrand's piece. Both similar in scope, I guess. Amanda's is in Salon and titled, "So What Happens When Donald Trump Refuses to Leave Office? The Nightmare Scenario Could Happen." Subheader here of, does anyone still believe Donald Trump will leave office voluntarily? The real question is what we do about it. And I don't know if there's going to be any answers, really, in this piece or any other. You can't predict this sort of thing, I guess. But you can predict that trouble will arise and start thinking about what to do about it. That's not a bad idea. Amanda starts this way. Polls currently show that all the major Democratic presidential candidates are pulling way ahead of Donald Trump. And while Democrats should take nothing for granted, Trump will run a campaign so nasty it will likely put 2016 to shame. There is at least some reason to hope that Americans will turn out in large numbers and that Trump will be soundly defeated in 2020. That victory would be both exciting and an enormous relief, a moment when we all collectively begin to believe that the national nightmare is ending. But as soon as that happens, if it happens, the next nightmare will begin. It may be minutes, hours, days, or even weeks, but at some point between Election Day in November 2020 and Inauguration Day in January 2021, odds are strong that Trump will declare that the election was fake news and refuse to leave the White House. I mean, we've always speculated he can't stand being there, but he can't stand losing, much more so than he can't stand being president, I think. This possibility has lingered in the if column since he was first elected, largely because Trump is a terminal narcissist whose inability to admit his own mediocrity caused him to lie his way onto the Forbes 400 list and pretend to be his own publicist in a pathetic effort to generate tabloid coverage of his personal life. Now, the prospect that Trump will simply declare the election null and void and refuse to relinquish power in the 2020 victor is better understood to be in the when column. This past weekend was not a good one, and this is a piece that's a little older. It's a June 17th piece, so I guess the past weekend prior to that. This past weekend was not a good one in terms of Trump's signaling that he will refuse to accept the results of any election he loses. After internal polls commissioned by the Trump campaign were leaked, you remember this, showing that the president is trailing badly in several battleground states, Trump angrily called the polls fake and fired the pollster working for him. He also suggested on Twitter that it was possible the people would demand that I stay longer. longer than 2 terms of office. In fact, using his joking, not joking strategy to suggest that he's not hemmed in by laws or the Constitution when it comes to retaining power. One principal talking point of Democrats who are reluctant to begin an impeachment inquiry is that Trump needs to be removed at the ballot box, not by impeachment. The argument is that Trump can't be removed from office through impeachment since Republicans, who control the Senate, will refuse to convict him no matter how much damning evidence there is. Depressingly, that argument has merit, with vanishingly rare exceptions like Representative Justin Amash of Michigan. Republicans have shown that there is no level of criminality Trump could display that they are unwilling to accept, so long as it allows them to retain power. But that's also why there's a real danger that if and when Trump refuses to leave office after an electoral defeat, Republicans will go along with it. And why not? They haven't drawn any visible line yet when it comes to Trump cheating or breaking the law. On the contrary, Republicans were already flouting the law in their attempts to retain control over the government, even though a majority of Americans have clearly rejected them at the polls. So far, there appears to be no limits to what Republicans will allow so long as it entrenches their power. Think about what Republicans were doing even before Trump came along. Gerrymandering and voter suppression efforts predated his candidacy, taking off in earnest after the Republican-controlled Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell also flatly refused to hold a hearing for Barack Obama's Supreme Court nominee, Merrick Garland, violating all norms and traditions to hold the seat open so a possible Republican president could fill it. This trend goes clear back to the 2000 Bush v. Gore decision, in which the Supreme Court's conservative majority handed George W. Bush the presidency rather than allowing a fair and complete vote count in Florida. Under Trump, Republicans have only become bolder. Robert Mueller's report documented Trump's extensive efforts to collude with a Russian criminal conspiracy to interfere with the 2016 election, as well as Trump's extensive cover-up of that conspiracy. Instead of doing anything about it, Republicans have persistently made excuses for Trump, either lying about what's actually in the Mueller report or drawing false equivalences to legal and transparent choices made by Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. McConnell's response to the Russian criminal conspiracy to undermine the last election, in fact, has been to reject any effort to prevent such conspiracies in the future. Congressional bills have been written up to shore up election security, and McConnell simply refuses to bring them for a vote. Trump made clear in his interview last week with George Stephanopoulos of ABC News that he fully intends to cheat in 2020 the same way he cheated in 2016. McConnell's response has basically been, bring it on. Again, Republicans are so complicit with Trump's criminality that it is simply a statement of fact to note there is no chance that the Senate would vote to convict Trump in an impeachment trial, no matter how serious his crimes are. A 2/3 majority, or 67 votes, is required, which would require all the Democrats aligned independents plus at least 20 Republicans. If they refuse to throw him out for being a criminal, why on earth would they throw him out just because he lost an election? As the saying goes, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Based on that, we must presume that Trump and the Republicans will not be hemmed in by law or custom when it comes to holding on to power they haven't earned. It would be deeply unwise for Democrats to pin their hopes on the possibility that Trump suddenly, after all this time, becomes the kind of man who would admit he lost an election, or that Republicans will finally decide that there's such a thing as going too far when it comes to taking power in defiance of democratic will. How do we deal with it when Trump simply declares the election null and void and Republicans back his play? The time to plan for that is right now. Being caught flat-footed and scrambling to catch up will simply make it easier for Trump to entrench the ideas that his hold on the White House is immovable, just as he and Republicans have entrenched the idea that it's normal and acceptable for the Senate to refuse to convict him no matter what. Unless Democrats move swiftly and forcefully when Trump refuses to leave the White House, and they need to plan for when, not if, Republicans will be able to make forever Trump feel inevitable and indeed almost normal, as they've done with their other successful efforts at gutting American democracy. So, good warning. Not much in the way of planning for exactly what to do in the case of such an emergency. But I don't know if anybody's really capable of that. Let's see whether Natasha Bertrand and Daryl Samuelson take a similar tack or a different one in their piece in Politico from the 21st of June. What if Trump won't accept 2020 defeat? The situations all seem far-fetched, but the president's comments have people chattering in the halls of Congress and throughout the Beltway. In 2016, Donald Trump waffled over whether he would accept the election results if he lost. Since then, Trump has repeatedly joked about staying in office beyond the 2 terms the Constitution allows. Jerry Falwell Jr., Trump's most prominent evangelical supporter, has suggested Trump should get 2 years tacked on to his first term as payback for the Mueller investigation. The president's own former lawyer, Michael Cohen, has warned that, quote, there will never be a peaceful transition of power should Trump fail in his reelection bid. The scenarios all seem far-fetched. It's almost a question for science fiction movies, cracked a former top Secret Service official, but the constant drumbeat nonetheless has people chattering in the halls of Congress and throughout the Beltway, what if Trump won't accept defeat in 2020? And one scenario in particular has Democrats nervous. The lawsuit-happy Trump contests the election results in court. It's been a worry in the back of my mind for the last couple of years now, said Representative Brendan Boyle, a Pennsylvania Democrat. California Representative Ted Lieu, a frequent Trump critic and early impeachment inquiry supporter, acknowledged the same concern, but said he trusted law enforcement would do the right thing and install the winner of the election. Even House Even House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, no, not a Republican, has told her party to prepare for the possibility that Trump contests the 2020 results. Constitutional experts and top Republican lawmakers dismiss the fears as nonsense, noting there are too many forces working against the sitting president simply clinging to power, including history, so what, law, and political pressure. Yeah, right. That is the least concern people should have. Of all the silly things that are being said, that may be the silliest, said Missouri GOP Senator Roy Blunt, who presided over the 2016 inauguration ceremony and expects to do so again in 2020. The one thing we are really good at is the transition of power. We'll see. Constitutional law expert Jonathan Turley said a lingering incumbent would simply become irrelevant once the new and duly elected president is sworn in. At that point, the defeated president is nothing more than a guest, if not an interloper, in the White House, the George Washington University professor noted. The system would make fast work of any president who attempted to deny the results of the election, he said. But a court battle over a presidential election is not unprecedented, and Trump has shown a willingness to tie up his disputes in winding legislation. The Democratic National Committee and Trump's campaign were in court all the way up until Election Day 2016, fighting over charges of voter intimidation and ballot access. All candidates have a right to contest results in federal court, Turley said. It's not up to the candidate to decide if an election is valid. It's not based on their satisfaction or consent. They have every right to seek judicial review. Even so, contesting the results of an election in more than one state would be a massive undertaking, said Bradley Schrager, a lawyer specializing in election litigation, who has worked with several Democratic campaigns. He added that given the time frames to launch recounts and election contests, you'd have to be preparing months in advance to be able to do that. There were also deadlines for submitting an official electoral vote tally, Schrager said, so legal battle couldn't and wouldn't drag out indefinitely. I did a little trump there. It actually just says wouldn't, but I said couldn't, but then I decided to go with and. Couldn't and wouldn't drag out. You could do either one, actually. That's what he tells me. Still, Pelosi's comments nodded to the Democratic suspicion that Trump will put up a fight. She argued the Democrats must win by a margin so big that Trump won't, or rather can't, challenge the results. The sentiment, Democrats say, is fueled by Trump's cavalier attitude toward presidential term lengths. Trump continues to talk up the prospect that he could serve past the constitutionally mandated period. On Twitter last weekend, Trump pondered, "Do you think the people would demand that I stay longer?" The line mirrored language he used at a rally in Pennsylvania last month where he talked about living in the White House for 20 years. "We ran one time and we're 1-0. Sort of. But it was for the big one. Now we're going to have a second time. And we're going to have another one. And then we'll drive them crazy," Trump said. "And maybe if we really like it a lot, and if things keep going like they're going, we'll go and we'll do what we have to do. We'll do a 3 and a 4 and a 5. Garbled syntax once again, but you get the idea. Trump also promoted Falwell Jr.'s line from May that the president should get 2 extra years as payback for time stolen by this corrupt failed coup, retweeting the Liberty University president this time. The president has long casually toyed with the idea that he could stay in office beyond the constitutionally set maximum. In March of 2018, Trump praised the ruling Communist Party of China for abolishing presidential term limits. Then, a month later, he publicly pondered why he couldn't be in office for 16 years, an apparent reference to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who died during his 4th term. The 22nd Amendment, ratified a few years after Roosevelt's death, prohibited future presidents from serving more than 2 consecutive elected terms. It's not just talk of extending term limits that have raised questions about the president's respect for the next cycle. During the 2016 campaign, Trump stoked fears among his supporters that the election would be, quote, rigged, and he refused to state during his final debate with Hillary Clinton that he'd concede to his Democratic opponent if she won. His crusade extended into Election Day when, just before 5 p.m., Trump incorrectly tweeted that Utah officials report voting machine problems across the entire country. In fact, the problems were just in one county. Even after being declared the 2016 winner, Trump continued to state without evidence that millions of people voted illegally, fueling questions about whether he would have taken this argument to court if the result hadn't gone his way. When asked whether Trump would commit to conceding the 2020 election if he lost, the Trump re-election campaign turned the issue back on Democrats. It was Stacey Abrams, the rising Democratic star, who actually refused to concede defeat in her bid for the Georgia governorship, an aide noted. This question would be better asked of Stacey Abrams, who still refuses to accept that she lost the governor's race in Georgia, or Hillary Clinton, for that matter, who still whines that her coronation was stolen, the aide said to Politico. It's also irrelevant because President Trump will be reelected in 2020. The White House did not respond to a request for comment. The stakes for Trump in 2020 are high. If he loses, the president will lose his immunity for criminal prosecution the moment his successor is sworn into the White House. And several Democratic presidential hopefuls have suggested their Justice Department would be hard-pressed not to bring charges against Trump for obstructing justice using the evidence in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's final report. Federal prosecutors in New York have also been reviewing potential campaign finance violations. Heard a little bit about those maybe being quashed. Maybe we'll catch up with that story. Confronted with Trump's past remarks, Republicans remain largely unmoved. As untraditional a president as he is, you could say that, I think he understands if you lose an election, you lose an election, and the other person wins. said Ohio Representative Steve Chabot. We never did get his pronunciation right? Is it Chabot? Does he say that? A senior member of the powerful House Judiciary Committee, he is. There's no chance of anything like that possibly happening. That's just hysteria. No way that would ever happen. Chabot recalled getting similar questions about President Barack Obama holding on to power, serving more than 2 terms before the 2016 election. I didn't want to laugh it off because these were my constituents, but I'd explained to them that there's no chance of that happening, he said. Unlike Obama, though, Trump has fanned the concerns with his rhetoric. He could also put the scuttlebutt to rest if he wanted to, and said John Q. Barrett, a St. John's University law professor. He's to blame, at least in the minimal sense, that he doesn't shoot this down and say all the unequivocal, constitutionally obedient stuff that any president would say, said Barrett, who served as an associate under Reagan-era independent counsel Lawrence Walsh. Trump could pour a bucket of water on this all right away. The GOP may not take the idea seriously now, but they would be key to convincing Trump to concede in 2020 should the president resist an electoral college loss, said Stephen Levitsky, a comparative political scientist and professor of government at Harvard. No matter what the actual mechanisms are, which laws, which police, the key here is the Republican Party, he said in an email. The onus, Levitsky said, would fall to GOP leaders including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham, and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy to come out and say enough is enough, Trump lost. Republicans to date have often given Trump the benefit of the doubt on controversial statements and actions, but Representative Ro Khanna, a California Democrat, said he is confident that even a GOP that has embraced all things Trump would rebuke a lame duck Trump if he refused to respect the election results. Even my Republican colleagues who are not willing to impeach have said to me that they would not stand for a president defying a court-certified election result, nor would they stand for a president running for more than 2 terms, he said. Khanna added that he was more concerned with the integrity of the election itself and the shenanigans that could happen in the counting of the votes in these states. It's important to make sure that we have strong election protection lawyers in polling places around the country to prevent further interference and verification on election night of each state's results as they come in, he said. Despite giving assurances Trump would not cause problems if he lost, lawmakers can't help but recall the most recent contested presidential election as an example of a close race that could become a model for an upside-down 2020 race. I feel quite confident that whoever wins the next election will be president, Chabot said. Now, of course, that being said, then you have the 2000 Bush-Gore election. That was nuts. And that, nutty as it is the end of that piece. I don't know. Still no answers as to what could possibly be done, and it may be that there are none. But 2 calls to action in terms of thinking this through and planning for it. I guess it's going to be up to us to provide ideas about a possible solution. Not sure that I have any or that they're appropriate for discussing on the radio. Weird. Keep an eye on it. See if you can think of something between then and now. Another story that we absolutely have to get caught up on is the apparent new detail available, now no longer quite so new because these 2 date from June 19th. Details about details uncovered in the investigation of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. There is the straight news version of this story in the Washington Post, as written up by Carol Morello and Karim Fahim on June 19th, entitled UN Investigator Calls for Probe of Saudi Officials in Khashoggi Killing. And both pieces are illustrated with the same video of UN Special Investigator, speaking about this. I haven't actually gone through the video here, but it's a little bit confusing flipping back and forth between the two articles. But I think the best thing is to share them both and have some discussion about those. The first, as I said, I think is the straight news reporting of it. You likely already know many of the details, but maybe you too were distracted from it by events here in our own country, which are not entirely unconnected. A UN investigation into the brutal slaying of Jamal Khashoggi, released Wednesday, that would be last week, provides the clearest picture yet of the journalist's final moments inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, refocusing attention on Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and his crackdown on dissidents. The months-long investigation by Agnes Kalamard, a human rights expert at the United Nations, faulted the United States and other countries for not exerting enough pressure on Saudi Arabia despite credible evidence, and that is in quotes, of the likelihood that Mohammed was involved in Khashoggi's killing. She called for sanctioning and freezing the prince's assets, oh my, that would be a big deal, until he is either cleared or definitively implicated. With access to audio recordings provided by Turkish intelligence, Kalamard laid out in graphic detail how Saudi government agents prepared to kill and dismember Khashoggi. The planning started days before the killing, after Khashoggi, by then one of Saudi Arabia's most prominent dissidents, startled the staff at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul by visiting to obtain a certificate of marriage eligibility. "We were all shocked," the consulate's security attaché said in a phone call to an official in Saudi Arabia on September 28th, the day of Khashoggi's first visit last year. "It is known that he is one of the people sought." Couldn't believe that he had walked in and delivered himself up, I guess. Pretty amazing. The details and other revelations in the report ended a respite for Saudi officials from international censure as the killing faded from conversations among allies and investors. Interesting grouping there, allies and investors. Instead, the focus had turned to Iran, with Saudi Arabia positioned as vital to countering security threats attributed to Tehran. Kalamard, a special rapporteur for the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, said that Saudi authorities participated in the destruction of evidence after Khashoggi was killed, namely Khashoggi, I guess, and that culpability for the slaying extends beyond the 11 Saudis who are on trial in a closed-door judicial proceedings in the kingdom. Mr. Khashoggi's killing constituted an extrajudicial killing for which the state of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is responsible, Kalamard's report said. Adel al-Jubeir, the kingdom's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, dismissed the findings in posts on Twitter on Wednesday. He said the report included contradictions and baseless allegations. Jubeir also rejected the report's calls for a UN-assisted criminal inquiry into the killing, saying that the judicial authorities in the kingdom are the only ones competent to hear the case. Kalamard said she found no smoking gun incriminating the Crown Prince himself, but said he had played an essential role in repressing dissidents and almost certainly knew that a criminal mission targeting Khashoggi was being planned. Evidence points to the 15-person mission to execute Mr. Khashoggi requiring significant government coordination, resources, and finances, she wrote. While the Saudi government claims that these resources were put in place by Ahmed Asiri, every expert consulted finds it inconceivable that an operation of this scale could be implemented without the Crown Prince being aware, at a minimum, that some sort of mission of a criminal nature directed at Mr. Khashoggi was being launched. Asiri, Saudi Arabia's former deputy head of intelligence, is one of 2 senior Saudi officials implicated by the kingdom's prosecutors in the killing and the only senior official on trial. Kalamard's account of Khashoggi's death is the most definitive to date, even though her inquiry was hampered by Saudi Arabia's refusal to allow her to visit the kingdom to conduct interviews. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and President Trump have deplored the killing of Khashoggi, who was a contributing columnist for the Washington Post in the year before his death, but they have said the relationship with Saudi Arabia is too important to be sidetracked by a single incident. Pompeo recently said in the United States, invoking emergency powers because of rising tensions with Iran will... how did I read this here? Let me go back on this one. Pompeo said recently in the... for some reason in the United States. Well, of course he said it there, although he does travel around the world. Pompeo recently said that, I guess we should say, the United States, invoking emergency powers because of rising tensions with Iran, will sell weapons worth $8 billion to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. At Wednesday's Senate confirmation hearing for Kelly Knight Craft, Trump's nominee to become U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Senator Lindsey Graham laid blame for Khashoggi's slaying squarely on the Saudi crown prince. He did it, said Graham, one of the biggest Republican critics of Trump's approach to the kingdom. Wouldn't have happened without him. He knew it was going to happen. He wanted it to happen. He caused it to happen. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of other things going on in this kingdom. Human rights groups echoed Calamard's call for an international investigation. Calamard's report underscores that there will be no justice for Jamal Khashoggi unless Congress steps up, said Rob Berchinsky, the senior vice president for policy at Human Rights First. Saudi leaders have made it clear that they intend to get away with murder. President Trump has made it clear that he values arms sales over the killing and dismemberment of a U.S. resident. Congress must make it clear that it will not let this stand. I wonder how. In a telephone interview from Geneva, Calamard characterized the U.S. response as ambiguous and conflicted. At the highest level of the U.S. government, there has not been a determination to hold to account the state of Saudi Arabia, she said. She called U.S. sanctions against 17 suspects, most of them low to mid-level personnel, insufficient. Calamard offered a macabre account of Khashoggi's final moments drawn from audio recordings that captured events inside the consulate in the days before Khashoggi visited a second time and on the day of the killing. She said she was permitted to listen to 45 minutes of conversation, a small fraction of the 7 hours of audio captured by Turkish intelligence. Her team was permitted to keep notes on only a portion of the recordings. Other conversations were reconstructed from memory, she wrote. Some of the audio was hard to discern. For instance, on the basis of recordings, the special rapporteur could not reach firm conclusions about what she and her investigators were told was the sound of a saw in operation. The Turkish authorities undoubtedly have more information and intelligence about events in the Saudi consulate than they were willing or able to share with the inquiry, the report said. According to the report, 13 minutes before Khashoggi entered the consulate on October 2nd, two of the Saudi agents, Maher Mutreb and Salah Tubaigi, a forensic expert, discussed dismembering the body. Joints will be separated, Tubaigi told Mutreb. First time I cut on the ground. If we take plastic bags and cut into pieces, it will be finished. Yeesh. Khashoggi's name was not mentioned, but Mutreb referred to the, quote, sacrificial animal. The report also said that Tubaigi expressed concerns about what was about to transpire, telling Mutreb, my direct manager is not aware of what I am doing. There is no one to protect me. The audio suggests they attempted to make Khashoggi think he would be kidnapped and repatriated to Saudi Arabia, not killed. When Khashoggi arrived at the consulate on October 2nd, he was invited to the consul general's office and asked whether he would return to Saudi Arabia. He responded that he wanted to return in the future, the report states, but the Saudi agents, using the pretext of an Interpol warrant, said they were there to take him back to the kingdom. More conversation followed, the report said. Khashoggi insisted that people were waiting for him outside, as one of the agents tried to persuade him to send a message to his son. What should I say? Khashoggi asked. See you soon? I can't say kidnapping. Type it, Mr. Jamal, one of the agents replied. Hurry up. Help us so that we can help you, because at the end we will take you back to Saudi Arabia, and if you don't help us, you know what will happen at the end. Then, I guess he didn't, then in the recordings, Sounds of a struggle can be heard, the report said. In her report, Calamard painted a poignant picture of Khashoggi, an important but traditionalist journalist in Saudi Arabia. Khashoggi was not seen by dissidents to be naturally one of them, Calamard wrote. Increasingly isolated by his views, he went into self-exile. Living in the Washington area, he had little income, little security, and little status, making him lonely and unhappy, Calamard wrote. His decision to remarry suggested he was preparing to live a fuller, more settled life, she said. And that is the conclusion of that sort of straight news reporting piece. There's also this one here from Aaron Blake on the same day, June 19th, and illustrated with the same video from the UN investigator. Title of this one, running in the fix rather than in the national security section of the paper here. These gruesome new Khashoggi revelations reinforce the ugly bargain Trump has struck with Saudi Arabia. Now we get more to the point, I think. The Trump administration has made a calculated decision not to retaliate very much against Saudi Arabia for the assassination of Washington Post contributing columnist Jamal Khashoggi. Citing the importance of its alliance with the Saudis and the economic benefit of selling arms to them, always, all the time, no matter how much they've already got, I guess, President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo have also declined to judge Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman harshly, even though the CIA concluded he ordered the killing. A new report lays out in gruesome detail just what they are looking past. The report from a United Nations Special Rapporteur, Agnes Calamard, details what happened before Khashoggi's murder. It notes that every expert consulted said it is inconceivable the Crown Prince wasn't at least aware of the operation. Here are a few key passages that drive home the nature of the bargain the Trump administration has struck. First up, different sections here. Khashoggi's false sense of security. A previous visit to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on September 28th apparently left Khashoggi with a mistaken sense that he could return safely. The passage from the report: he spent around 45 minutes inside and was treated very well. Ms. Hatice, I guess his fiancée is Hatice Cengiz. Well, I don't know how you pronounce that G in there. Again, that's Turkish. Is she Turkish? I got Hatice right, I think. Cengiz, maybe we'll say that. Recalled that Mr. Khashoggi left the consulate very happy. He felt relieved and he did not hesitate going there again. Consular officials he spoke to told him that he would need to return on 2 October 2018 to obtain the marriage document. Next section. The plot was launched almost immediately. Key parts are bolded, Aaron adds to this excerpt from the report. Later that same day at 19:08, it's a 24-hour clock here, we're doing things international style, Mr. Mohammed Al-Otaibi, Saudi Arabia's consul general in Istanbul, spoke to an individual, and it says here in parentheses, AA. Not certain who that's supposed to be. It is not clear that all of this conversation was captured on the tape made available to the Special Rapporteur. However, AA was to be heard saying that the head of state security called me and they have an assignment. They are asking for anyone from your delegation for a special issue. They are asking for someone who is in your protocol. He said that they need a person from your protocol for a special and a top secret mission. He can even get permission if required. This smacks of something that's been translated into 2 or 3 different languages along the way to English. But it continues here at 20:04. Consul General Al-Otaibi then spoke to AMA, a member of the consular staff. AMA asked, "Is there anything?" Now the bold part. Mr. Al-Otaibi replied, "Yes, there is an urgent training in Riyadh. They called me from Riyadh. They told me they asked for an official who worked on protocol, but the issue is top secret. Nobody should know at all. Even none of your friends will be informed." I'm not certain what that's probably portends darkly for something. I just don't know what yet. I mean, we know what happened, but that seems a little strange. Joints will be separated is the next section. Ugh. Just minutes before Khashoggi would arrive on October 2nd, 2 Saudi agents, including a forensic doctor from the Saudi Ministry of the Interior, discussed how they would dismember him. We got a little taste of this earlier on. At 13:02, inside the consulate, Mr. Maher Abdulaziz Mutreb and Dr. Salah Mohammed Tubaigi had a conversation just minutes before Mr. Khashoggi entered. Mr. Mutreb asked whether it will, quote, be possible to put the trunk in a bag. Dr. Tubaigi replied, no, too heavy. He expressed hope that it would be easy. This is all bolded now. Joints will be separated. It is not a problem. The body is heavy. First time I cut on the ground. If we take plastic bags and cut into pieces, it will be finished. We will wrap each of them. Leather bags. There was a reference to cutting skin. Dr. Tubaigi also expressed concerns. My direct manager is not aware of what I am doing. There is nobody to protect me. At the end of the conversation, Mr. Mutreb asked whether the sacrificial animal has arrived. At 13:13, a voice said, he has arrived. In these recordings heard by the special rapporteur, Mr. Khashoggi's name was not mentioned. Next section, we will anesthetize you. Once Khashoggi was in the consulate, an altercation quickly ensued, and Khashoggi apparently soon referenced kidnapping and then being given drugs. A Saudi person responds, we will anesthetize you. At 13:22, another excerpt from the report, Mr. Mutreb asked whether Mr. Khashoggi had phones. Mr. Khashoggi replied, 2 phones. Which brands? Apple phones. Send a message to your son. Which son? What should I say to my son? Silence. You will type a message. Let's rehearse. Show us. What should I say? See you soon? I can't say kidnapping. Cut it short. Take off your jacket. How could this happen in an embassy? I will not write anything. Cut it short. I will not write anything. Type it, Mr. Jamal. Hurry up. Help us so that we can help you, because at the end we will take you back to Saudi Arabia, and if you don't help us, you know what will happen at the end. Let this issue find a good end. Now more bolding. At 13:33, Mr. Khashoggi said, there is a towel here. Are you going to give me drugs? We will anesthetize you. That is the end of that section. How do you guess from that? There's a towel here. You're going to give me drugs. I don't know. But I guess he did, and that's grim all by itself. Next up, the sound of a saw, ? After a struggle, one man says, did he sleep? Which the report and Turkish intelligence link to the possible injection of a sedative. Shortly after, the report references the sound of a saw, perhaps the bone saw the Saudis were reported to have brought with them. The excerpt reading, sounds of movement and heavy panting could be heard in the remainder of the recordings. The sound of plastic sheets wrapping could also be heard. Turkish intelligence concluded that these came after Mr. Khashoggi's death while the Saudi officials were dismembering his body. Bolded here, the Turkish intelligence assessment identified the sound of a saw at 13:39. The special rapporteur and her delegation could not make out the sources of the sounds they heard. Next section, an apparent ridding of evidence while wearing what looked like Khashoggi's clothes. At 15:53, CCTV cameras recorded Mr. Mustafa Mohammed al-Madani, accompanied by Mr. Saif Saad al-Khatani, exit from the consulate's back door. Mr. al-Madani wore what appeared to be Mr. Khashoggi's clothes. Mr. al-Khatani had a white plastic bag with him. The two got into a taxi and traveled to the Sultanahmet district. At 16:33, they entered the Blue Mosque, where Mr. al-Madani changed clothes. At 16:29, they got into a taxi that took them to the Levant metro station. Somewhere near the metro station, they threw away the plastic bag into a garbage bin. They returned to the Movenpick Hotel at 1809. The cleanup, complete with burning things, comes next. According to Turkish intelligence, on 3 October, consulate staff was prevented to go to the second floor of the consulate. I guess from going, I guess we would say. Around 11 o'clock, the inner part of the consulate was cleaned. Between 1600 and 2100, CCTV cameras recorded a fire in a barrel in the backyard of the consulate. The consul general did not leave the residence the whole day. The next day, more burning, again from the report at 9:35 on October 4. The Turkish authorities detected smoke coming from the backyard of the consulate. At 16:05, Saudi consular staff were observed burning papers in a barrel in the backyard of the consulate. And then journalists were told the consulate's cameras hadn't recorded. Another segment. During the visit, the journalists learned that although the building was equipped with cameras, they failed to record anything the day Mr. Khashoggi disappeared. The consul general added that the idea of kidnapping a Saudi citizen by a diplomatic mission is something that should not be put forward in the media. He also said the consulate was equipped with cameras, but they did not record footage. How odd. Next section, the Crown Prince condoned such actions. The report emphasizes that its role is not to declare whether Mohammed is guilty of anything, but rather whether there is credible evidence warranting further investigation. It says there is, and that the Crown Prince has condoned such actions previously. And it says so this way. Academic research on Saudi Arabia tends to suggest that the level of control exerted by the Crown Prince over the management of the country's political, security, and economic affairs is extremely high. The Crown Prince is less subject to the constraints that historically distributed power among the royal family and the court. The operation against Mr. Khashoggi has to be understood in relation to this organized and coordinated crackdown, one that included repeated unlawful acts of torture and physical harm. At a bare minimum, Crown Prince condoned this behavior and allowed the repetition and escalation of these crimes. He took no action to prevent or punish those responsible. The Crown Prince willingly took the risk that other crimes, such as the killing of Mr. Khashoggi, would be committed, whether or not he directly ordered this specific crime. Next section, every expert said the Crown Prince had to be aware of the mission. We heard a bit about this earlier. Evidence points to the 15-person mission to execute Mr. Khashoggi requiring significant government coordination, resources, and finances. While the Saudi government claims that these resources were put in place by Ahmed Asiri, every expert, again, consulted finds it inconceivable that an operation of this scale could be implemented without the Crown Prince being aware, at a minimum, that some sort of mission of a criminal nature directed at Mr. Khashoggi was being launched. It also emphasizes that the Saudis' destruction of evidence could not have taken place without the Crown Prince's awareness. The report says such destruction of evidence was in violation of the state obligations under international law. Trump has declined to blame the Crown Prince. Our article now concludes, our intelligence agencies continue to assess all information, but it could very well be that the Crown Prince had knowledge of this tragic event. Maybe he did, and maybe he didn't, Trump said in a bizarre statement. The statement came even after the Post reported the CIA had said the Crown Prince ordered the killing. Well, the details picked up by Turkish intelligence are certainly new. The situation remains pretty much the same. Everyone is on fairly solid ground in saying that the Crown Prince probably knew about it, probably even directed the whole thing. And here stands Donald Trump and the rest of the Trump administration saying there's just nothing to it. It might not even have been him. Could have been a 400-pound guy in a bed somewhere. Still not willing to acknowledge that he knew it. Still contradicting our own intelligence services in doing so. And still no indication whatsoever that they have any interest in changing direction with Saudi-owned Arabia over anything, military, economic, diplomatic, what have you. And who really expects that he will? Not much more discussion, by the way, and I'd really like to find out more about this part of it. about the possibility that the Saudis somehow thought that they were doing Donald Trump a personal favor in getting rid of Khashoggi. That doesn't appear to come up, and I'm not sure why, but I guess they were limited in scope in this UN investigation. But like I said, I don't think this has cleared anything up entirely about the entire episode. But again, something we've followed, and everyone, longtime listeners to the show, know we follow everything we can figure out about Saudi Arabia. So I thought well worth our time to get up to speed on that during this pre-recorded lull. Now I have got a real experiment for you here. I have a segment that I recorded a long time ago, for a pre-recorded show, and I don't believe I ever used it, and I've had it sort of in storage, and well, for one thing, it happens to be almost exactly the length I need, although I'm in the process of ruining that right now. For another, though, it's something I set aside because it wasn't making sense to use for the longest time. It is actually something I believe I recorded in 2015, prior to Trump's election, obviously, but it is about Trump's immigration policy, his proposed immigration policy, and some folks who actually set about trying to calculate how much his policies, such as they were and such as they had been stated to that point, would really cost. And I don't know that anybody was really chiefly concerned with the cost, but they were trying to illustrate the ridiculousness of it all, but as well as the danger of it all. They're very clear about the dangers, and in fact, they're quite prescient about the dangers. And I don't mind saying that in my listening through the piece, I'm not that bad either. And this is 2015, after all. And so ignore the dates or any time that I mention, that this was last Friday or this will happen next month, because it's actually quite some time ago now. But it's really, I don't know what to say. It's really kind of eerie and amazing. And of course, now that we're supposedly on a 2-week hold for the beginning of the Trump immigration roundups, if they ever actually get off the ground, and as much as we like to make fun of the fact that he can't get anything off the ground, we do have to worry. This is pretty serious, and you don't want to be caught flat-footed for this. But with that now in the offing, and all of the controversy surrounding the various issues and family separation and the treatment of people in detention, and the question of whether or not you're allowed to say concentration camp for fear of invoking the Holocaust and Adolf Hitler, it's all in there. It's all in there in 2015, so it's remarkably on point, and I thought I would bring it back and add it to the show for that reason. So on Friday, we discussed breaking down the numbers and the math behind Donald Trump's already ridiculous and despotic plan for deporting everybody in the entire world, somehow, from out of America. And as it turns out, this is not a new question. And people have attempted to try and figure the dollar amount out in the past. But I will start with a piece from America's Voice, the immigration policy folks, responding to the comments that actually triggered the Friday discussion. They have a good start on, bashing the hell out of the ridiculousness of the proposal, of course, and also a couple of good links to people who have actually tried to calculate this stuff before. Trump affirms policy details for rounding up immigrants. This is an America's Voice press release dated September 11th. That was last Friday. And in response to the very comments that we talked about on Friday from Trump. Not only could we do it, but if it's handled properly, we could do it in less than 2 years. Remember this, that he said the deportation of 11 million people would take 18 to 24 months. In a call last night with supporters, that would have been Thursday night, September 10th, GOP frontrunner Donald Trump revealed new details, sort of, about his plan to deport over 11 million undocumented immigrants and an additional 4.5 million American citizens born to immigrant parents. Forgot about them. 15.5 million people now. In the call, Trump said that, quote, with good management, sure, it's cure to everything, The process should, quote, take 18 months to 2 years if properly handled. But of course, it will be Donald Trump handling it, so we have a problem. Trump made the comments in response to a question about his plans to implement his promise of mass deportation. In your illegal immigrant planning, that's the way this question is put, what do you see as an appropriate or approximate time for rounding up and processing the deportation of thousands of illegal immigrants in our country? Millions, of course, but they said thousands. 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. Have you thought about a process in order to do this? Despite reports that Trump's plan could cost up to, and here's where the numbers come into it, $166 billion, and that completely removing 11 million people from the country is impossible on any timeline, Trump simply replied, yeah, it's called really good management. He later got more specific, saying, I think it's a process that can take 18 months to 2 years if properly handled. Well, $166 billion. Where does that come from? That comes from a Politico article, or it is linked to a Politico article entitled Trump's Immigration Tab, $166 billion. The mogul's plan has galvanized the right, but he doesn't mention that deporting illegal immigrants would cost a pretty penny. This by Seung-Min Kim from, August 19th of this year. And illustrated with a particularly dumb-looking picture of Donald Trump. The hat is awful, by the way. If there's anything that's really trademark about Donald Trump, it's that hair. It's ridiculous hair. And maybe, I don't know, he's done a great job for his slogan and getting it passed around by putting this hat on, but it makes him look like a total idiot. But whatever. And it takes away the big trademark that he's got going for him. In close-ups, without the hair, he actually looks a lot older. His face looks a lot older, especially in that stupid old person's hat. Anyway, how do they get to the $166 billion figure? I'm going to take a short detour and see if we can't tease that out of the Politico article before returning back to America's Voice. The writer here, as I mentioned, Seung-Min Kim, says Donald Trump's immigration plan is huge. I mean, they love using the word huge now, in every aspect, including its price tag. Think $166 billion, and that's on the low end. That does seem rather ridiculous, doesn't it? The Republican business mogul is turbocharging his tough on illegal immigration reputation that he's used to ride to the top of the GOP presidential polls by pushing to deport everyone here illegally, ramping up immigration enforcement, and even calling for an end to birthright citizenship. He's managed in the process to pull the GOP field to the right on an issue that could be critical in the general election and cause plenty of heartburn for party bosses still experiencing flashbacks from Mitt Romney's damaging call for self-deportation in 2012. That would at least be cheaper. There you go. Mitt Romney just saved the government $166 billion. You had to do some time travel to get to that, but that's as real as anything. As far as immigration is concerned, we need the wall, Trump said on NBC's Meet the Press Sunday. That same day, he unveiled his proposal on his website. We want people to come in. I want people to come in. They have to be wonderful people. They have to come in legally. But Trump has said little about how much his plan would cost or how he'd pay for it. This doesn't even include the wall so far, I don't think, this $166 billion. Other than a dubious assurance, he'd make Mexico foot the bill for the wall. Even if all the people were coming from Mexico, every last one of them, don't see how he's really going to make that work, but okay, we've been over that. So, with help from experts at groups spanning the political spectrum, the National Immigration Forum, the Center for American Progress, the Migration Policy Institute, the Cato Institute, and the American Action Forum, Politico rang up the cost of key provisions in Trump's immigration proposal. Here's how it breaks down. First, mass deportation, $141.3 billion of those dollars. That's clearly the top line item there. While it's not explicitly outlined in Trump's 6-page immigration proposal, he has repeatedly pushed for deporting all 11 million immigrants here illegally and then letting the, quote, good ones come back, which also has no cost, I'm sure. Trump's plan does call for mandatory return of all criminal aliens, but that could mean both legal and illegal immigrants. In January 2011, Kumar Kibble That's the name. Unusual. Then the Deputy Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement told lawmakers that it costs about, and here's the figure you need, $12,500 to deport one immigrant from the United States. Multiply that by $11.3 million, the size of the undocumented population in 2014, according to the Pew Research Center, and you get $141.3 billion. The Liberal Center for American Progress pegs the per-person rate a little lower at $10,070, maybe economy of scale there, giving Trump's deportation plan a bit of a discount at $114 billion. But there are bigger enforcement costs to consider beyond actual deportation. In a March report, the American Action Forum projected that it would cost $419.6 billion to $619.4 billion. They only wanted to use those digits, I guess, 1964 in any combination. It's like The Price is Right. See, easy. That's how you figure these things out. They give you the 4 digits and you move them around and eventually the bell rings. All right. So $420 to $620 billion to deport everyone here illegally, tallying not just the price for removing one person, but the enforcement costs to prevent future illegal immigration. That would include the wall. And deporting all 11 million undocumented immigrants would take about 2 decades, according to the AAF. That sounds a little bit more like the timeline you would need, and then you'd have to have zero leakage back in. But, yeah, I mean, I still think that there's an awful lot of, well, I guess the per-person deportation cost from immigration and customs enforcement probably wraps up everything from top to bottom, from detection to, apprehension to detention to processing to health, medical, food, to actual deportation. So, I don't know. It seems to me, for instance, I learned in doing background research on this, the prison population of the United States of America currently is about 2.5 million. And to get all this done, of course, all the deportations of 11 million people, not to mention the American-born children of all these folks. So 15 and something million. So doing about 500,000 per month. You got 2.5 million prison beds now, and they're all full, overfilled, right? He wants to increase, essentially he needs to build a detention facility to hold enough people to stay and then move out again, 500,000 at a time in a month. I mean, I guess you don't need the prison beds forever. And hey, good news. Once you get rid of all the illegal immigrants, you can start incarcerating even more people, 500,000 extra. Anyway, I wanted to point out that I think, detention facilities pretty much stressed to the max at this point. He would propose increasing it by 20% immediately and keeping it open every day for 2 years and moving people in for 1 day and then out, which extraordinary wear and tear on all of that as well, too. I would think that would be a huge price tag all by itself. Huge, even. Continuing with the Politico article, many of these individuals have been here a long time. It's not that easy to identify them, said Douglas Holtz-Eakin, who shouldn't be consulted about anything, the conservative think tank's president and a longtime advisor to Republicans. Was he the guy that, I can't remember, who was the guy that was identified by one of the Republicans over the Iraq War as like the stupidest person on the planet? Does anybody remember that? Was that him? I can't even remember now. I wonder, I can't remember the exact quote now. And I'll never be able to figure it out now unless I have, let's say the dumbest person on the planet, I think is what came up. Does anybody remember who that was about? It really might have been him. But I'm not going to be able to catch this on the fly. But it is recorded. Never mind. That's not important right now. Focusing now instead on the impossibility of the deportation plan. Even this person, who might possibly have been called the dumbest person on the planet, but maybe I mistake you for someone else, says even if the people you needed to deport were easily identifiable, You have to somehow detain them, and that requires literally boots on the ground. And you have to process them, and that requires administrative judges and hearings and time, and then you have to deport them. I think that would all get rolled into ICE's price on that, but I don't know. What else would you have to do? Triple the number of immigration and customs enforcement officers. $8.4 billion a year. In order to deport everyone here illegally, a Trump administration would need to beef up its immigration enforcement team. Trump proposes to do it just that, by tripling the number of ICE officers charged with rooting out those without papers. About 5,000 now at current count, according to Chris Crane, head of ICE's Officers Union. In fiscal 2014, the federal government spent about $2.79 billion for detention and removal operations, so a force 3 times the current size would cost about $8.4 billion a year. Trump says he'll pay for this by revoking some tax credit payments that are funneled to immigrants here illegally, a proposal that's been floated before by congressional Republicans. Difficult enough to do. By the way, at this point, I'm sure that Trump and Trump supporters would point out, and they'd have a case here, that the idea that we currently spend, what was it, $12,000 something on deportations, that would remain at or near $10,000 to $12,000 per person per deportation done at this scale and with this speed, I guess is a questionable prospect. Of course, there's always economies of scale, which is, you gotta figure on something like that. Also, of course, I imagine that the only way of getting to your time goal would be to pretty much eliminate all administrative appeals, etc. You just wouldn't have any access to due process of any kind in fighting your deportation. It would just be a matter of you get rounded up and then booted out of the country, period. No legal process. So I assume that cuts the cost per person considerably. And I don't know what else. I mean, just, economies of scale. You can feed people from cattle troughs and, or not feed them at all. Since you've all got to be moved into the system and then out of the system in one day. You can all live one day without food. So there are great cost savings to be realized. Good management, as Donald Trump puts it. So, all right, each one of these figures has to be questioned. But still, there's definitely some cost. And all of these things are going to play in any actual, even stupid and horrible and inhumane and almost war criminal level treatment of people would still cost a tremendous amount of money. I don't think you can move people in and out of the system in one day. You're going to have to feed them. There's going to be medical care issues, housing issues, detention issues, housing. It's prison beds. This is what we're talking about. Finally, we're going to get our FEMA camps. Maybe then, hooray, at last, sort of, ironically, he says. All right. What else have we got? The wall, right? Another expensive plank in Trump's immigration plan is building an impenetrable permanent border wall along the southern border and making Mexico pay for it. So that's highly questionable. But anyway, setting aside the unlikely scenario that Mexico would actually cough up the money for a wall, the government has already shot down that idea, but they could get a new government. Estimates show that it would cost at least $5 billion to finish building the fence that already runs along the path of the southern border. Those estimates come from a 2009 report from the Government Accountability Office, which found that it costs an average of $3.9 million to build 1 mile of fencing. That's fencing, not a wall. It's different. About 670 miles of fencing is already up along the 1,989-mile southern border. So finishing the fence that's already there would cost about $5.1 billion. But the actual cost is likely much higher, according to experts. The vast majority of the existing border fence is single-layer fencing near urban areas, which is considerably easier to build. Much of the remaining 1,300 miles runs through rough terrain and remote areas without roads. So it's fair to assume that the per-mile cost of finishing the fence would be on the higher end of the GAO's estimates, which was about $15.1 million per mile. Immigration experts also say because much of the property on the southern border is, what kind of property do we love so much in this country? Private. Trump would have to consider the additional cost of seizing the land to build his wall. On top of the actual construction, the feds would have to set aside money to maintain it. That's what you have to do with things that you build. In this year's budget request, the Obama administration asked for $274 million to maintain the fence that's already there. Upkeep for a fence that's nearly 3 times longer would cost at least $750 million per year, assuming that a Trump administration wants to make sure its fence is in tip-top shape. And that's only if it's a fence. Trump insists his border wall, which is different, would be under budget and ahead of schedule. Sure, why not? Because it's costless to say that, so you say it. And nobody's getting through that wall, Trump told Meet the Press. Believe me, nobody, I know for sure that no one can get through this imaginary wall, because when I imagine it, nobody gets through. That's all that really needs to happen to make it true in Trump's world. Though Trump's immigration plan is filled with controversial and somewhat questionable provisions, that's the nicest possible way of saying it. In fact, it's so nice it's wrong. His call for a nationwide E-Verify system isn't one of the controversial and questionable provisions. E-Verify, which already exists, allows employers to check electronically whether workers are in the country legally, and it's a popular tenet of essentially any immigration reform proposal. The Senate Gang of 8, more gangs, that's our problem, bipartisan immigration bill, co-written by Marco Rubio and somebody else who's not mentioned here, would have required that all employers use E-Verify within 5 years. 5 years, not 2, 5. The Gang of 8's E-Verify plan would cost about $750 million to make the system mandatory nationwide. Right now it's only voluntary. And then another $1.4 billion to implement the new system, according to the Congressional Budget Office. That would equal a $2.15 billion price tag if Trump were to take an E-Verify plan similar to one written by a rival. The Cato Institute also estimates that implementing E-Verify would cost $2.3 billion over 10 years. But Trump could find cheaper E-Verify plans by shopping around, because good management, right? For example, an E-Verify bill that passed the House Judiciary Committee in June 2013 was said to cost about $1.3 billion over a decade, according to the CBO. How is it different? We don't know, except that it costs less. We'll just take that one. How about this? A visa tracking system. How much? $7 billion. This is another provision in Trump's plan with bipartisan support. And remember, of course, Chris Christie the other day tried to jump on this bandwagon, needing a visa tracking system so that FedEx something. In his 6-page proposal, Trump calls for increasing penalties for visa overstays and adds that the government should also finish a visa tracking system, presumably a biometric exit entry system that takes foreigners' fingerprints as they enter and leave the United States. The U.S. government already has a system in place that collects fingerprints of foreigners entering the country, but it's the exit part of an exit entry system that's long stymied government officials because of bureaucratic and logistical hurdles. These are always the fascinating ones. The Los Angeles Times estimated in July 2013 that a new system tracking foreigners who exit the country would cost more than $7 billion. That provision was part of the so-called border surge in the Gang of 8 bill, which would have required new biometric exit systems to be installed at the nation's biggest airports within 6 years. It's more than 2. Obviously, a biometric exit system is a popular idea among lawmakers because an estimated 40% of the current undocumented population did not arrive in the United States illegally but came on temporary visas. A system that records when foreigners leave the United States would help better track visa overstays. Next section, mandatory detention. $1.7 billion a year. In Trump's immigration proposal, all immigrants caught trying to cross the border illegally would be detained. In other words, they get to come in and stay, at least briefly. Illegal aliens apprehended crossing the border must be detained until they are sent home. No more catch and release, the billionaire proclaimed in his 6-page plan. But a Trump administration will have to be ready to dole out considerable cash to do that. Border Patrol agents apprehended 486,651 immigrants at the border in fiscal 2014. That's under 500,000. We're saying they're going to have to kick out 500,000 each month. This was under 500,000 for the entire year. With the vast majority of them, by the way, 479,371 to be exact, caught at the U.S.-Mexico boundary. It costs $123.54 per day to detain an adult, according to the Department of Homeland Security, and an immigrant in detention stays in custody for an average of 29.4 days. No time for that, of course, under the Trump plan. If you delayed for 29.4 days at, what did we say? Something like 16,000 bodies per day. Imagine the pileup you'd have at that point. So assuming that all immigrants caught at the border are detained about 29 days, the cost of doing so would be about $1.7 billion annually. But according to Mark Rosenblum, director of the U.S. Immigration Policy Program at the Migration Policy Institute, the actual price tag is likely to be higher since about 107,000 of those apprehended in 2014 were juveniles, and the cost of detaining them is much higher. Despite the high dollar figure for Trump's ideas, advocates for stricter immigration policy say it's a worthy expense. I'm sure they would think so. The question is, can you get that money? Controlling immigration is a core function of the state, unlike, say, farm subsidies, said Mark Krikorian, executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies, and consistent enforcement would also save money by reducing use of taxpayer-funded programs. Economic costs? ? That's up next. The $166 billion price tag from Politico's analysis tallied up the actual price tag for Trump's plan. But those costs don't even begin to calculate the hit to the economy that Trump's proposal would cause, pro-immigration experts say. Trump's proposal includes a wealth of ideas meant to restrict the flow of legal immigrants into the United States, such as a pause before new green cards are issued to workers and control of the number of low-skilled employees admitted to the country. That may get applause among many conservatives, but experts have long said reducing immigration would diminish the labor pool and hurt the economy. In the absence of immigration, we shrink, Holtz-Eakin said. If you do smart immigration reform, you basically get to pick your future labor force, future population, and that's a big economic advantage. But I guess, I don't know. Maybe Trump's plan supposedly contemplates that in the let the good ones, whatever they are, back in again at the end. All right, so that's an explanation of the $166 billion price tag. Don't know if it's correct, don't know if it should be higher or lower, but we are talking multiple billions of dollars, and that's important. But he says, yeah, good management can take care of all of it. With that, back in the America's Voice press release, Trump provided a time frame for his unprecedented plans to expel 11 million people from the United States. It's almost incomprehensible to imagine what those 18 to 24 months for our nation and anyone who appears to be an immigrant, what that might be like. Trump's really good management would create an extremely hostile environment on a scale unseen before in this country. In essence, he would need to create a police state with vigilantes and informants constantly targeting and checking the papers of anyone they deem to be an immigrant. We have a presidential candidate who, instead of discounting the concept of rounding up millions of people, embraces it with a time frame to accomplish that goal. Anyone in the media who talks to Trump needs to dig deeper into this heinous scheme. We need details on the management plan and what exactly it would entail in terms of costs, logistics, manpower, human suffering, and more importantly, what it would do to the very essence of this country. The images Trump evokes of buses and trains being loaded with families should elicit outrage from anyone with a shred of decency. But it probably won't. In a recent piece in Al Jazeera America, Malcolm Harris paints a provocative picture of what Trump's plan would mean in practice. Let's take a look at that. First of all, there's the scale. Deporting 11 million people would be a population transfer so large it has only a couple historical precedents, and one of them is Adolf Hitler's. Sorry, had to go there. To extract that many people from their communities would require a much larger and more determined effort than immigration and customs enforcement is capable of at present. To this end, Trump proposes tripling the number of ICE officers specifically geared to increase deportations. In a country with volunteer border patrols and lasting unemployment, I don't think President Trump would have a problem recruiting. Sending an amped up ICE on a mass deportation mission wouldn't just be an assault on undocumented people and their families. It would be an attack on American cities, where more than 90% of them live. On the other hand, ICE agents might not be the worst thing we'd have to fear. In a report for The New Yorker, Evan Osnos looked at how popular Trump is with white nationalists and neo-Nazis. They have heard his anti-immigrant dog whistle loud and clear, even earning Trump the endorsement of leading Nazi site, The Daily Stormer. A Trump presidency would embolden these organized racists much more than his campaign already has. I have no doubt that they would take the opportunity to terrorize racial minorities and attack resistance infrastructure. I don't believe all Americans are willing to put themselves on the line for the undocumented in their communities or to fight tyranny in general, but some do, and more will. A Trump presidency would delegitimize the federal government just as he sends thousands upon thousands of unwelcome agents into American cities. For the past few months, many in the media have treated Trump with kid gloves, failing to note the blatant racism he's espousing. They accept his bloviating and sound bites about mass deportation as if it has no real-world impact. Trump might be good for ratings, but racism is dangerous for the country, and it's time for Trump's racism to be called out for what it is. His plans to purge the United States of millions of immigrants have dire consequences, and it's past time to stop pretending otherwise. According to Frank Sharry, executive director of America's Voice, we at America's Voice have moved from being disgusted by Trump's racist remarks about Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals to being alarmed by Trump's xenophobic and radical immigration policy proposals. We are confident that the immigration reform movement and our allies will make sure Trump's policy ideas never get implemented. But imagine, as a thought experiment, what it would look like and be like if his ideas were to become a reality. Immigration agents roaming Latino neighborhoods, a massive increase in the detention and deportation of undocumented immigrants, U.S. citizen kids having their citizenship and passports revoked, weeping families being ripped apart, immigrant workers being pushed out of jobs and into a burgeoning informal sector of exploited labor, entire industries from agriculture to hospitality to childcare and beyond, facing existential threats, a sharp economic downturn, due to the disruption in the labor market and a massive wave of resistance and conflict throughout America, allies around the world denouncing America for human rights abuses. In short, it would turn out to be one of America's darkest chapters. That appears to take much, much more of what Trump has to say into proper account.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, wow, how about that? We really kind of hit the nail on the head with that subject. How about the elimination of food and medical care being predicted in 2015? Concentration camps, basically. Even the Hitler invocation. Amazing how much was right even then.